Well, greetings. Hello and a heartfelt welcome to another EMIC fireside chat. I hope you're able to hear me now. Please feel free to put the chat comments in there. My name is Richmond Wee, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today's fireside chat. I am in Hamilton, New Zealand. Greetings and kia ora. Today, we're diving deep into the topic of ensuring the safety and integrity of digital mental health tools. The key aim is to make sure that these tools promote positive mental health outcomes for everyone while balancing the potential benefits and adverse effects. I am the co-chair of the Special Interest Group on Law and Ethics, e-Mental Health International Collaborative. Recently, together with the other co-chair of the Special Interest Group, Piers Gooding, and in collaboration with key international experts, the group developed the position statement on the ethics and law of e-mental health. This document was launched during the March 2022 global webinar by the e-Mental Health International Collaborative. Piers will speak about this a bit more next, and I will share some information about my background later when I contribute as a speaker as well. So for our chat today, we will be looking at 5 issues. Broadly and in summary, they relate to ethical principles, professional responsibilities, risk management, regulatory matters, and next steps. Now, you would have seen the 5 bullet points that was publicized together with this webinar, and I probably won't read them out now, but it's worth referring to them, and I'm sure in the chat some of our admin folks will share the questions with you all. So we are incredibly fortunate to have a remarkable panel of participants from various parts of the world. Collectively, they will address how we can go about prioritizing safety and integrity in digital mental health care. But before we begin, I have a few important points to mention. First, if you like to disclose your current location or area of interest, you can click on the 3 dots next to your name tag, choose edit, and add your country or area. This allows you to connect with others who share similar interest. I will do that when I've got a moment when I'm not speaking. Secondly, we love questions. If you have any questions for the panelists during the webinar, please feel free to post them in the chat box. During the Q&A session, I will do my best to include as many of them as possible in our discussion. Thirdly, please note that today's webinar has been recorded, and the EMIC team will share the recording in the knowledge bank. Access to all the excellent content there requires an EMIC membership. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day. He is Dr. Piers Gooding. Piers, I'll do a little introduction for you, if that's okay. Piers is an Australian Research Council DECRA Fellow at the University of Melbourne Law School and an Associate of Melbourne Social Equity Institute. He is a social legal researcher looking at disability and mental health related law and policy. He is the author of A New Era for Mental Health Law and Policy, published in 2017 with Cambridge University Press. And he also serves on the editorial board for the International Journal for Mental Health and Capacity Law. Dr. Gooding has collaborated with the UN Special Rapporteur for the Rights of People with Disabilities, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Physical and Mental Health, the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and the World Psychiatric Association. Piers, if you are available and free now, please step through to the webinar.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, especially amongst such an esteemed panel. So let me send my greetings from Melbourne, Australia. It's customary here for me to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land the Melbourne Law School stands. So let me acknowledge their elders past and present. So I'll speak very briefly about the position statement that Richmond referred to and developed by EMIC, and set out some of the overarching themes that we settled on. But before I do, I thought it would be quite helpful for me to simply start with some examples of why it's important to keep law and ethics in mind. And I'll just start with some examples from this year of what I would describe as controversies or legal issues that have emerged in the last little while. And I've often start with things from recent months, and I've been able to track down a few. In March, as some of you may have seen, the US Federal Trade Commission has banned online counselling service BetterHelp from revealing its users' data, including sensitive mental health information, which it was sharing with Facebook and others for targeted advertising. And the company will be now required to pay $7.8 million for deceiving customers after promising to keep sensitive personal data private. In February, Joanne Kim at Duke University released a study on just how expansive the market is for people's health data. And she found that data brokers were marketing very highly sensitive data on individuals' mental health conditions, which included what antidepressants they were on, whether they struggled with insomnia or attention issues, and a range of medical ailments. And in January, Coco, an online emotional support chat service, attracted controversy by experimenting with large language model GPT-3, it was, on around 4,000 people who were using the service. Now, there was some notification to those individuals that a chatbot may be being used, but it became clear that the process was not well understood by the individuals who received the messages, and so was unlikely to have fulfilled the requirements of free and informed consent, potentially. So these are just some of the incidents that have emerged this year alone, and there were others that I could have included. But as I heard one prominent psychiatrist say, each new incident like this has a corrosive effect on public trust in online mental health options. So all the more reason to get it right. And hence we feel quite justified in releasing this position statement and call to action. And allow me to just acknowledge some of the people who are involved before I start to talk about the themes in substance, because it very much was a collaborative effort among some of the members and associates of the eMental Health International Collaborative. So it was a really great opportunity to bring people together, to begin a conversation and promote action and encourage an ongoing process of inquiry, and ultimately encourage the highest ethical standards in e-mental health practices. And as is an interest of mine, to bring attention to the legal matters that are relevant. And these are the themes that we settled on. And let me just briefly describe them before I hand over to the next speaker. Partnership of and leadership by people with lived experience seemed really important to us to emphasise the importance of this group being involved, given they are imagined as the end beneficiaries of various e-mental health practices. And the need for active involvement of this group in the design, development and use of e-mental health technologies was for us an overarching expectation, both from the perspective of user design standards, but also broader norms around sort of what mental health policy looks like in the contemporary world. And we really felt that diversities in language and culture need to be represented in lived experience input, particularly given the diversity of EMIC members. The second major theme was privacy, which protects a citizen from unlawful interference with their private life and correspondence. And at a minimum, basic privacy principles we felt must be upheld in e-mental health practices. Regarding accountability, we thought proper mechanisms of accountability will be absolutely vital to ensuring public trust in technologically enabled responses to mental health. And we felt that e-mental health initiatives must be safe and secure. Transparency about the technological systems was important, particularly concerning AI and related to matters of explainability and the requirement for informed consent, so people knew what they were signing up to. Equity, non-discrimination, and fairness was also really important so that we could ensure technologies were designed to avoid perpetuating discrimination. Professional responsibility was the final theme that we included, which relates to the role of professionals in upholding the highest standards of scientific integrity. So again, these are designed merely to provide ongoing conversation and to spark ideas, and that is precisely what this forum is designed for. So without further ado, I'll hand back to Richmond for the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Piers. Looking forward to the panel discussion. Next up, we've got the second speaker, Smriti Joshi. Smriti is an experienced leader in the field of digital mental health. She has carved a niche in the area of legally and ethically safe delivery of digital mental health support and services. Presently, she's working as the Chief Psychologist International at WISA. I hope, Smriti, I pronounced that correctly. That's spelled for the benefit of our attendees here, WYSA. Feel free to Google that. Smriti is considered to be a thought leader amongst her contemporaries. She has published papers, book chapters, and she's very willing and very happy to share her knowledge and experiences of working in this field. Her opinions are widely sought after by publications like Very Well Mind, USA Today, The Quint, Evening Standard UK, Daily Express UK, Newsweek, and Smriti. I can't do justice to a full list. Those are some that I've got there. Smriti has contributed to setting up telecounseling guidelines for the ISCP, and she has been engaged by educational institutions and private and government mental health organizations to train budding and practicing psychologists in India to quickly and smoothly transition to offering services via telemodalities during the pandemic. She currently also leads the ethics in mental health conversations for therapists in tech, and I will just share with you the link there in a second. And Smriti, welcome. The floor is all yours, or the session is yours for now.
Thank you, Dr. Richmond. It's very humbling experience to be a part of this panel. So thank you for inviting me to contribute whatever I've learned and from my experiences in this field. I'm still learning, I feel. So pardon me if I make any errors while speaking over here. What I'm going to speak about today is as representing my country, India, having tried to establish telemental health platforms and run some trainings for the professional here. I've noticed, and I think my colleagues would have noticed as well, those who come from low middle income countries or low resource settings, that there's a huge repertoire available globally for various gold standard best practices. EMIC has its wonderfully designed and drafted position statement, but there are genuine challenges that we face when we try and bring forth digital mental health tools in countries or low resource settings like India, or there could be low resource settings even in high income countries. Now, digital mental health tools are going to be used by people with needs across the mental health spectrum and varying needs and conditions in varying contexts. These tools provide a wide range of benefits, as we all know. And some of these people may not have access to in-person mental health services for varying reasons. And it's absolutely essential then that the tools provide evidence-based information and that these tools are based on the ethical principles as shared earlier by Dr. Piers, and also aligned with the best practices in mental health care. It also entails transparent data handling, adherence to regulation and standards, and by upholding the safety and integrity for digital mental health tools and platforms, can we enhance their credibility and foster user confidence, which is very important. Because another challenge that we all encounter as providers of such services, and I'm speaking on behalf of many providers who are trying to bring in digital mental health tools, whether it's at a governmental level, or whether it's as a private practitioner or platforms that are being run today, that user engagement, user adoption becomes a challenge. And it's because of many reasons. When we say safety, we are referring to protecting the well-being and minimizing harm to digital mental health tools and service users. It involves ensuring that these tools and platforms do not cause any physical or psychological harm and mitigate potential risks associated with this use. And when we say integrity in digital mental health tool, we mean that it relates to maintaining the reliability, the accuracy, and ethical standards of tools. It involves ensuring that the original intent and purpose of the tool being delivered via these is happening and not something else is there. For example, like, Dr. Pierce shared that there have been data breaches and users are not aware about what else would their data be used with. There is a lack of transparency around where the user rights reside with regards to their own data. Now, there's evidence also that uptake by clinics and integration of digital technology into mental health practice remains disappointingly low, even in higher income settings. There could be many barriers to this. For example, let's take up a very simple example, lack of access to seamless internet or mobile phones. Research shows that there are gaps to internet and mobile technologies that persist across many regions, even in high-income countries that are low resource settings, and specifically low for women or young people as compared to men. And we need to look at opportunities to align mental health care priorities with existing sustainable development priorities. For example, can we look at the goals outlined in SDG 9 to increase access to technology as a way to support efforts to increase access to evidence-based mental health services being delivered via digital mental health tools? Is that a way where we can bridge the implementation gap that's being a challenge in providing digital mental health tools in a safe way to the users, to the population that needs it the most in these particular settings? It's also important that we probably look at involving frontline health workers who work closely with population who needs these services the most, and also bring in users with lived experiences in designing these digital mental health tools to ensure that the technologies are contextually relevant, support successful adoption, and seamless integration into existing health systems and community mental health services. What I've shared today has been a result of our experience of bringing in digital mental health tools and services across many countries. And we are constantly trying to contextualize, bring in users, bring in healthcare providers, psychologists into the whole gamut of creating these tools so that they are safe, they are integral as much as we are trying to ensure that they follow the ethics and the laws around it. I think I'll pause here and I'll give the mic to Richmond to bring in the next speaker.
Here we are, we're back again. So here I am introducing our third speaker for the day, Gerald Corr. Professor Corr is Head and Clinical Director of the Future Primary Care Program at the Ministry of Health Office of Healthcare Transformation, where he leads primary care transformation using telehealth, novel diagnostic tools, and new models of care. This is in Singapore. He works with stakeholders from public polyclinics and private general practitioners to ensure that solutions that empower patients and providers to improve quality of care can be rapidly prototyped and tested. Gerald is also professor at the Sao Sui Hock School of Public Health and joint professor, Dean's Office and Department of Medicine, Yong Lu Lin School of Medicine, National University of Singapore, and as well the honorary senior consultant, Department of Medicine at the National University Hospital. A family physician by training, Gerald obtained his master's in medicine, family medicine at the National University of Singapore in 2000, fellowship in family medicine, College of Family Physicians Singapore in 2003, and PhD in family medicine from Western University, Canada in 2012. So Gerald, if you're ready and you're there, please step in. And like myself before, please remember to unmute. I must say as a little joke for the group. Okay, cool, carry on.
Thank you so much, Richmond. Okay. thank you so much to my preceding speakers to kind of set the stage. I was actually going to try to anchor my presentation today more from a practitioner's point of view, but I'd like to recall what Pierce has actually presented, the 7 principles of ethical principles for mental health, partnership, and active involvement, for example. And I'll kind of walk through that to kind of base my presentation today from a professional's practice perspective. So when we talk about partnership and active involvement, I think patients are often forgotten in the process of actually developing mental health tools and services, and we've got to remember that. But we must also not forget the various different healthcare professionals from the different levels of healthcare that are actually involved in the provision of care, especially when we're talking about transitions of care. Like say, for example, when we're handing over care from a psychiatrist to a general practitioner, or from a general practitioner to a counselor to a psychologist. It is often in these periods of transition whereby breaches in both of safety and data security usually occurs. So we have to be very mindful about how we actually do these transfers of cares. I also like to say that in terms of partnership, I think the governments play an important role as well in the provision of mental health services, largely linked to the next ethical principle of fairness, non-discrimination, and equity, particularly equity, because in a sense, a lot of our digital mental health tools tend to favor those who are technologically savvy, which tend to be those who are younger. So the older generation tends to usually feel displaced when using digital mental health tools. Digital mental health tools are also largely used for those who are more educated. They're more able to use these electronic tools, and of those who are more well-to-do, because many of these electronic tools require you purchase of electronic devices. So in order to achieve equity and fair access equity, often governments need to also come in to ensure that such tools are made available to everyone. I think when we talk about the third ethical principle of accountability, accountability actually involves many parties. And it's not as a blanket term. There are a lot of people who need to be accountable. We talk about the healthcare professionals, and I think those of us who are counselors, psychologists, who are healthcare practitioners, we're very aware of the need for confidentiality. But having said that, we also need to take into account the various different technology providers, companies, who also need to share the same ethos, that whatever data that we're actually collecting for our patients or from our consultations need to be kept confidential and private and secure. And lastly, governments also play a role in terms of accountability by holding people who breach all these accountability rules accountable in terms of by providing regulations as well as enforcements, as well as punishments if a breach actually does occur. When we talk about evidence-based practice, I think it's also important to realize that when we use a lot of digital mental health tools, we should always be cognizant about evaluating them, because we want to first kind of ensure that, number one, that they're effective. And if you're going to ask governments to fund for all these digital mental health tools, the next dimension that we need to consider is whether it's cost effective. Because often a lot of times when we do trials and randomized controlled trials, we prove effectiveness, but it may not necessarily be cost effective. So therefore it requires to add in a dimension of cost to when we use the digital mental health tools, when we're evaluating them, to help governments to decide whether they're worth investing in for the countries. The last point I wanted to also make is mental health comes with, mental illness comes with a lot of huge social stigma. And it's usually, and in my part of the world, in Asia, where I come from, Singapore, the stigma associated with mental illness is actually very great. And it greatly inhibits people from wanting to step forward and seek help. So a lot of times when we talk about digital mental health tools, it actually provides that safety, that protection of and preservation of anonymity that allow people who actually need help for their mental health conditions to actually seek help in a very confidential, private, and data secure manner. Again, bringing to the practical point of equity as well as security. Okay, I think I'm done, and I'd like to hand it back to Richmond. Richmond, please.
Cool. Thank you very much, Gerald. Just as with previous speakers, some very important points there. Now, before we have a discussion amongst the panelists, I'm supposed to introduce myself, so I'll do this quickly and not too painful for myself, really. My work in the past 2 decades has primarily centered on ethical, legal, regulatory, and public policy issues involving human health and research. I say I've covered the waterfront of legal, ethical, and policy issues relating to medical and cyber technologies. And I've been engaged in a suite of roles from policy advisor to academic researcher, research management, and research funding advisor. I say cover the waterfront because I've been looking for another expression for being a generalist in some way, or having covered a range of ethical legal issues as a jack of all trade or livelihood. I've been involved in initiating a little summer research project on e-mental health here in Waikato University. And some of the ethical legal research projects that I've worked on include genomics technology, which seem to be a while back, but they are, I guess, parallels to be drawn with the introduction and implementation of new technologies. Now, having introduced myself, I suppose I'd like to make a number of points. Some of them may slightly overlap with the previous speakers. 5 points, I guess, and I'm reminded of what Piers said at the start, right through to Smriti and what Gerald have said. First, data has value. That value may be private, personal, or proprietary, involving and going beyond the individual into cyber, financial, commercial spheres. The second point is ethical, legal considerations should really be taken into account from the start, from upstream, if you like, as a metaphor, which would include, core designing, right through to further downstream to implementation, use, evaluation, continuous improvement, that kind of thing. With regards to risk management issues, I've increasingly felt, actually at the start, that issues like that should be prioritized for awareness and reactive as well as proactive action by those involved at the higher or highest level of governance within an initiative or organization or group. With regards to the regulatory matters, it is, we know, increasingly challenging, trying hard to keep pace. There is a sense of not doing enough sometimes, or not able to do what would be appropriate, even at a minimum. Perhaps I would like to think and hope, and maybe some of us are working towards it, and perhaps the position statement was a way, the secondary title was a call to action. Perhaps it's a way to help shape or catalyze international standards, or at least consensus, or some kind of harmonization. It is, of course, a question of what that would look like. And perhaps, I'll be very interested to hear from the group here today as to what that could possibly look like and how we could work towards that direction. I think what would be really useful now, increasingly as I do the work involving new technologies, and I'm sure you can rattle through quite a few of them. I've sensed that, at least from the research space and from academia, that multidisciplinary teams with the inclusion of lived experience, that is a principle within the position statement, and which Piers has also mentioned, that would be important. We also need champions for initiatives, leaders or leading people who are willing to come forward to show what the good examples, or what possibly the good examples are. The cost effectiveness issue is one that runs across in the balancing of, how do we take this forward? Now, that's a little bit from me. I guess now we should move into the panel discussion. May I refer to the speakers and as well as to the participants to the 5 questions here. And I'm happy to go around really, maybe firstly in the order that we spoke. So Piers, Smriti, and Gerald, if you are willing to address one or more of those points. Or perhaps maybe we should go around in the order of the ethical principles if you have anything to add, and feel free if any one of us would like to chip in. So Piers, we're all on mute at the moment, I think.
Yeah, look, thank you, Richmond. Look, it's been wonderful to listen to Dr. Joshi and Professor Ko and hear a little more about their perspectives as people who are providing really hands-on, practice-based approaches to these matters. I was struck by several comments made. Dr. Joshi mentioned that there are low resource settings to be considered even within high-income countries. And I think that speaks to that point about equity and fairness, and trying to sort of build in methods to consider how technology will land and what communities it will serve and what communities may be overlooked. And I think there's just lots to do there in terms of ensuring people are involved who represent those various communities, ensuring different languages are involved. I know, Dr. Joshi, you've done some work around what languages are used in generative chat and the differences that can make to the way services are experienced and received. So I just thought that there were several sort of striking points there about the need to open up that conversation and work out ways to build that into research design and maybe overarching sort of policy setting measures. I'll perhaps just leave it at that and pass on to the other speakers for now.
Oh, thanks. Smriti.
I think when Dr. Richmond came in before the panel discussion was started, and he kind of summarized already the principles and the application and the gaps, and how whatever points each of us has brought in are actually tied to the living principles that the EMIC's position statement already outlines. And I would definitely want to share that while we have been working to ensure that services we offer are compliant, legally safe, ethical, we do refer back to the EMIC's position statement, because it has very beautifully brought in a gist of best practices, the existing gaps, and how we can use to bridge those existing gaps. And I think it's a good reminder, a good reference source to continue to go back and refer to, and see how we can bring those principles into the work that we are doing. For example, digital mental health research has largely been centered in specific regions or health systems, and there is limited collaboration across diverse contexts, cultures, etc. And when we say these are digital mental health tools, it means people expect them to be available globally. And if there are RCTs on digital mental health tools being done in one specific area of the globe, and a lot of them are focused and being done on that particular population, what are we missing out on with regards to the other people who genuinely need, who still don't have access to even traditional mental health care services that are available? And there is a reason why we feel digital mental health tools can help bridge that gap, but for people who don't have access to traditional mental health care services. And it's all the more important that there is a lot of collaboration, like Richmond also mentioned, across disciplines, researchers, clinicians, engineers, people with lived experiences, policymakers, and this should happen across high income and low income settings as well, so that the experiences and challenges that are being faced by users with successful adoption, or for providers when they're prescribing these tools and platforms to their patients and clients, we can imagine the extent of challenges that will be faced by somebody in a low income setting when they don't have that access. So then we will be able to arrive at some very good problem statements to solve together. So I think that's where my head is right now.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Smriti. Before I come to you, I'm Gerald. We note that there are questions, or there's at least one question that's come up, and we can deal with that one when it opens up to the wider group. But Gerald, Gerald, would you like to add to that? And feel free, any of you to, if you want to chip in as well.
Okay. I actually think it would be good for us to actually go straight to addressing, if you don't mind, I'll just go jump straight to addressing Gary's question that he put in the chat, because I think it's a very relevant question to the topic of today. Gary asked, informed consent. How is informed consent for certain data and how this is shared? How is this done in terms of ethical principles and practice in e-mental health, for example? So Gary, I'm going to give an example of a project that I'm currently working on with in Singapore, and that is it's posing a bit of a challenge. So in Singapore, we have this mental health platform known as Mindline. So I can type in the chat, which everyone can have a look. So mindline.sg. So it's not unique. I think it's available. There are a lot of similar such platforms around the world, whereby people can actually log in, in an anonymous manner, log in to and use the website to access mental health resources. And Smriti, who is actually from Wiser, we've actually linked Mindline with Wiser. So it has actually had a chatbot function, whereby you can type in and have a chat with an entity who will then respond with you and provide some advice. Now, part of Mindline chatbot requires a screening. So we actually asked them to do kind of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the PHQ, as well as the GAD. They're to measure depression and anxiety respectively. And again, we provide this for lay people to log it, to play around with and to get to kind of estimate where they are in terms of the severity of the anxiety and depression. And often there is a self-smart subgroup of patients or subgroup of users who actually are quite severely, who are score very high in GAD and the PHQ, and would therefore benefit from actually seeking healthcare. But how do we get them to transfer from an anonymized state to an identifiable state whereby they can therefore start to seek healthcare from providers? And that has been a challenge for us. And one of the ideas that we are toying with, which we have not implemented, is to actually put it on the patient. So we ask the user, we notice that you're scoring high in anxiety and depression. Would you want to consider being referred to a professional? So of course, we'll give the usual list of phone contact numbers for people that who can seek mental health, their hotlines and such. But if they consent to say, I'm willing to release information in order for you to connect me to a GP who may have special interest in mental health, or to seek a counselor or a psychologist, the user is actually allowed to do that, and that's when he transitions to an identifiable state. Cognizant of that, is that there must be such services that are available. There must be what we call a handshake or a proper transfer of care from the anonymized state to identifiable state. And of course, there must be promise of data security and confidentiality maintained when you're actually doing the transfer process. There are some. It's very easy in the digital world to get consent by and all of us have done it before, right? And when you sign up for any new app, there's this long page, a lot of these the things that you're supposed to agree with. If you agree, just click consent at the bottom, and then that's deemed to be that consent has been obtained. While that may work in the digital world, I think in the clinical world that's not enough. I think in the digital world you actually need there's an element of also implied consent. So when a patient walks into a clinic and sees a doctor, we call that medical legally implied consent. That means the fact that you walked into a clinic, it says that you're consenting for the doctor to take a history from you and to examine you and to treat you. But you don't have that situation in the digital world. And you're not walking into a clinic, you're just pressing a button. And therefore it behoves upon us in the process, especially as I mentioned earlier, in mental health, it's got such a high social stigma attached to it, that proper consent is actually obtained. So one of the elements when you actually transfer from the anonymized state to making an appointment to see a GP or a psychologist, it behoves upon the professional at the other end to take proper consent, probably over through a video conference, before they embark upon the process of the treatment. Over.
Can I add to what Professor Gerald said, just from the experiences we've had with 6 million users across 95 countries, if I can say, and also with a lot of our partners like MOHD. I think something that we have stood by very strongly is that we will keep it anonymous, which keeps us away from a lot of data that other companies could possibly use for a variety of purposes, but we have decided not to compromise on it. And something that we always do is mention consent with regards to information, rather, with regards to what data is being collected, how will it be used, seek specific consent in case we are going to run a trial. We have a specific research app for it, where a separate induction process happens after people give consent. It is not done on the generic app that is run. And if it is done, again, there are consent messages which are sent in via push notifications or via messaging within the app. So users can choose to opt out. And there are FAQs where we mention about this specific point. We mention it in TOS and we mention it in the policies. So at specific points, and also when they are signing up, some basic essential consents around age. Say, for example, we say Visa is not to be used for below 13 years of age. Again, it's easy to just click tick. My daughter has clicked a checkbox for going on to Discord servers when she was 11 and she said I was 13. So there are those risks which are always there, but we have to ensure from our side that we are checking all the boxes, as many as we can, to ensure that when users come in, they are completely informed. For example, when people seek coaching, human coaching support on our platform, we just don't rely on the user's ability to read through and understand the informed consent that is provided before they onboard the coaching platform. And it is mandatory that the coach or the therapist will explain the informed consent, that this is the service, this is what you're going to share, this is how you own your data and you can reset that data at any point in time, no questions asked. And this is how you can ask me questions at any point in time and I am obliged to respond to these responses. So I think from as a clinician, as a practitioner, as a provider, if we ensure that we are following the ethical standards and compliances of the geography that we are residing in or offering the services in, for example, HIPAA, GDPR, or any other such country-specific compliances, plus we stick to ethical standards and legal obligations that I have to follow as an independent practitioner, when we club that all together and bring it in and communicate it at various points in time throughout the journey of a client on your platform, or in the recommendation of tools that is being made by a practitioner. Say, I recommend a tool to a person I'm seeing in my clinic, that, okay, you go ahead and use it. Then as a provider, I do need to be aware of what is happening on that platform. So that level of literacy and training is also important for providers as well.
Oh, thanks. I might go to, well, I will go to Piers and I'll have something to say as well. But I'm glad Gerald, we actually went for the jugular. When one runs the ethical legal sessions, there is often the tendency to go straight to informed consent. And I was trying to defer that, but I think obviously we've got a fair bit to talk about. But Piers, would you like to say something before I sort of summarize and put forward my views too? Or should I go first, Piers?
Feel free to go first, Richard.
Yeah, well, that question is, for lack of a word, it's an interesting one. It's a perennial question. I'll just focus on the ethical aspect, and Gerald gave a very fulsome account of the experiences that they've gone through. When people talk in ethics about consent, it's really meaningful consent, isn't it? You don't want meaningless consent. And basically, you know, I've looked at all the different legal tests and the principles. It's really 3 steps, the way I look at it. I call it the information, the communication, and then the decision-making aspect. So one needs to have the information provided in some way to be able to, as a second step, convey it, transmit it, and put it to the other party, the other side, and particularly whether they're consumer or users, whatever terminology it would be. And then they should be given the space and time to think about those issues, and then to thirdly come to the decision making aspect. Now, what's interesting, of course, with the current technologies, it actually allows for, and we know that with these interactions, it's not a one-off, you know, whether you're going first into the clinic or a virtual clinic, but it's on an ongoing, continuous, you know, relationship. So I had years ago come up with a term, for lack of a better word, a dynamic consent process, really to distinguish it from a static one that's fixed in time. I suppose a dynamic one is made of a number of static points, or very many fixed points in time where there's an interaction and going back and forth. I thought, looking at it positively, the technology allows for that to happen. And I said, look at internet banking. I mean, we're already doing it with some of the most, the greatest value, I suppose, at least financial value in our lives, let alone the other stuff. And called it a bank of some sort. And you know, obviously that's left to the technical issues, and then of course the core design issues. But coming back to a number of points that both speakers previously have said, it is important, I think, to justify the users of it, and subsequent users. Some might call it primary, secondary use, and all of that. And there's a general principle that people will work with anonymous. Now I'm speaking at a high sort of general ethical or principles level, that one would work with anonymous information, or if you like, reversible or irreversibly de-identified information, unless if it's necessary. And then you would then convert, you know, Gerald, that was a beautiful account, into identifiable, and then information, and then you will want to provide the safeguards around it. But what's really interesting too with the technologies we know now is that the technology should take into account the personalization or customization aspect, whether there's age, Smriti, if you've mentioned, or various preferences or personal circumstances. This is at the high level of principle. Can I put those 3 steps I use in the chat? Yes, I'll do that when I've got a moment. So that's what I would add to it. And I'm conscious of time, and I'll open it out further to people who would like to ask the questions, or I don't know if you'd like to type further, or maybe appear in person here. But Piers, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I don't think I could add much to such a fulsome account by all 3 panelists. First, let me say that it's extremely gratifying to hear that the position statement and call for action is being used by people who are working in the field, and especially a company who has the kind of integrity that Visa has shown sort of over and again, and over and above, I think, what is sort of often considered the bare minimum. They seem to be a company that really strives to sort of achieve excellence when it comes to ethical principles and adherence to law and so on. Yeah, Professor Koh, I was very struck by your account as well of exactly what Richmond describes, and I would share that view that it's a process of dynamic consent. And I remember an early EMIC webinar involving the CEO of Reach Out, a youth chat mental health service in Australia, Ashley De Silva, who spoke about the challenge or even a tension in providing services anonymously, and his service is one that bills itself as a safe place to chat anonymously, get support and feel better. And it perhaps speaks to some of your points, Gerald, about younger people not necessarily wishing to divulge who they are and where they're coming from, but rather to, you know, avoid some of the stigma and so on by just chatting anonymously and testing the water in a way. And Ashley spoke about the challenge of wanting to personalize support, knowing full well that that service does its best work when it knows where a person's coming from, what their challenges are, and so on. But that requires data. That requires information about those individuals. And the more data you have, the more protections are needed, as Gerald has very well outlined. And I think that dynamic consent was the key. That seemed to be the way that Reach Out were navigating these challenges by saying, well, if we are to gather additional information, we need to re-ask the person, is it okay for us to do this? And here are the reasons why. So I think it chimes with what other speakers have said.
Oh, thank you, Piers. I noticed that there's a question too about, I hope I'm not missing anyone before, but I'm looking at the question of the context of the youth service. And does the panel have any views about the ethical collection of and use, as well as consent issues with a parent or carer sharing sensitive information about their young person? Who would like to have a go first? Because I don't want to be talking all the time. Do any one of you have any views about ethical collection and use, as well as consent of a parent or carer sharing sensitive information?
Well, yes, so one thing that I'd also like to share is that, like you said, that we need additional controls. Peers, like you said, that, you know, we're collecting a lot of data, and you're right, AI is learning all the time. There are so many conversations happening all the time, and it's not that people don't share personal information, sensitive information all the time in these conversations, young people or adults or people belonging to communities, and they don't want a lot to get revealed about them at any point in time. And what we have done in place to ensure that the data remains anonymous unless there is a request from the user themselves for that data to be shared and de-anonymized. What we have done is put systems and controls in place that anonymize any PII, that recognizes that there's a PII shared or there is a sensitive piece of information shared, and it anonymizes itself. And we seek consent for this as well from users before we bring it on into their conversations, because it'll be shocking for them to see, oh, I just shared something and it's been hashtagged. You know, did I say something bad? Did I say something? So our clients, our users, whatever term we want to use, also need to be, this also needs to be a part of the initial informed consent about how a service is being provided, what kind of data is being collected, how will it be used, how will it be anonymized, and how will they get access if they, for example, need conversations from WISA to show to their practitioner that these are the kind of things I shared with WISA, and if these are helpful for my current treatment, here have a look at it. And they cannot show it as de-anonymized because that's information they would want their practitioner to know, right? So it is exactly that they own their data and they have all the rights over it, yet controls need to be in place as long as it resides with third-party systems or systems that don't directly belong to the user themselves. And I think with context of ethical collection and use of parents or carers sharing sensitive information about young person, with regards to this, I think we have, in my current experience and my past experience as an individual practitioner, what we have done is that there is, if the young person is the direct consumer of such a platform, we do let them know about the risks and benefits of this service and how consent from a caregiver is required for them to continue using the services, because there are certain challenges with this being an online platform and people residing in various geographies and where we may not be able to support them directly with the help they want. And we don't limit them to provide consent from a parent only, because that may not be the best person they would want to loop in with regard to their mental health treatment. So there is choice available. They could loop in their practitioner, they could loop in a caregiver, whoever they trust the most. And this is received on an email, and no data is stored on our systems. And as soon as we receive the consent, the emails are also deleted. So we don't save any such information from the carer or the parent. And there are escalation pathways where we have, again, try and discuss this up with with young people who share sensitive information or share suicidal ideations or difficult thoughts in their conversations with Visa and the provider, or if it happened with me in clinic, we discussed with them how we would need somebody to share this only to ensure that there is care available for them when they need it the most. But of course, there are people who have said no, and where we then let them know about the risks about it, and try and I think I am really understanding what Professor Gerald was also saying, that it's a very tricky space when it comes to young people specifically, or people at risk, because we want them to get the support. At the same time, we would also need to kind of value the trust they put in us, that the information that they are sharing with us is not shared with people who could misuse it or who could cause more problems for them. And something that is coming to my mind from recent articles about the 988 or 911 helplines that were running in the and in other countries, a lot of people hesitate from calling crisis helplines is because they get identified and the police or other people would probably reach out.
Cool. Thank you very much, Smriti. I'm conscious of time. Gerald, you had something to say before. Can we touch on that? And then we might just do a round of summing up, if you like. Yeah.
And thanks, Smriti, for what you said. And Richmond, you put something on the chat about legal age being the age of 16, and therefore giving proxy consent as well as child assent. I just wanted, and I think those are all valid points. And because there are only about 1 minute left, I'm going to just jump in and just remind everyone that the age of majority differs in different parts of the world. I'm not sure what it's like in Australia and New Zealand, but in Singapore,
that's right. That is the risk. That's the risk of typing something like that. I was going to make it qualified. It does depend on jurisdiction differences. We know that the laws differ. But there is a certain age, and it's actually not the age of majority, because if you look, we actually in genomics, we did a whole report on this, a few hundred pages. We look at different ages, whether it's for drinking, driving a car, and voting, and they all vary. But for healthcare, in the common law world, and by common law, I mean the one that's the systems that have been inherited from the Westminster legal system, the age, and this is the Gillick case, as some of you know, but of course, we're not all from that jurisdiction. But I would say those are just rough principles, and those are legal context. But thanks, Gerald, for that. I think essentially there are various steps if you look beyond the numerical or quantifiable figure. And then, of course, beyond the figure itself, it's actually assessing the competence, on a case by case of the person of that age too. So if you draw a map, if you like, you can see some of that. But anyway, those notes are, I'm sorry, but they're there for what it is. But no, thank you, Gerald. P.S. I was wondering if we should, I'm conscious of time, and if you'd like to add a few words, and then, yeah.
I'm just delighted to be part of a conversation, and it's clear that, the work of EMIC is essential in facilitating these international conversations on these matters and trying to draw out broad, shared, overarching themes while still making space and respecting national differences, whether it's in law or in sort of cultural and ethical preferences. So I'm just grateful to my colleagues for this panel and to the organisers.
Cool. Before I wrap up, is there anything Smriti or Gerald would like to add? Sorry, Gerald, I came through before the risk of putting stuff down in writing. But essentially, I'll end on this note, which is a general one. And we know that when we're moving between jurisdictions, there are various requirements and all that kind of stuff. And that was why I think the position statement was useful, as it dealt with high principles. And then it became really a matter of application, sensitive to the context, social, cultural, legal of each particular setting, if you like. And I'd like to acknowledge one of our committee members here, I dare say committee members, that's Ibuena. And he talked as well about some of these issues, low income, low resource settings, and they may well exist in different countries of various economic status. But ending on an international note, and I think that's why the coordination and harmonization is important, and it does really rely on individual countries doing their own thing and then joining up with other countries in reaching towards sort of regional, global level and context. So internationally, there is, interesting enough, the Sustainable Development Goals. I think it's target number 3. where the matter of promotion of mental well-being is stated. So it is good that at the high level we've got the endorsement or the awareness and call for that there. So on that note, I think I should thank our panelists, each of them, for contributing, providing so much value to the discussion, and also to the attendees. Thank you so much. We can't all see you, of course, but we're aware that you're with us at this time. And once again, if you're interested in watching previous EMIC webinars, including this one, which you might have to work through because there was quite a lot of material in there, please head over to emicglobal.com and the administrators will point you to that. So that's it for today. It's been a real pleasure having you all with us, and we look forward to having you join us again in future webinars. Thank you. Bye.